Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. This week we've got something a little different for you. If you've been following me on LinkedIn, then you will have seen me announce that I've just published a new book called WFH, Securing the Future for Your Organization. It's already available right now globally in paperback and on Kindle. You can find it now if you just search for my name or the book name on Amazon. And if you don't want to buy it from Amazon, then just copy the ISBN number from the Amazon page and ask your local bookstore for a copy. I wrote this book with Andrew McNeile, who's the Chief Customer Officer at Thinscale Technologies based in Dublin, Ireland. And Shelli Ryan, the founder and CEO of Adhoc Communications based in Las Vegas, Nevada, contributed a foreword to the book. So in this episode of CX Files, I'm going to talk to both Andrew and Shelli about the book and the work from home message it contains. Okay, Andrew and Shelli, it's great to have you both on the call to talk about the work from home book for the CX Files podcast. Now, Andrew, we worked on this project together, but why don't you just introduce the book and why now and what's the focus of it?
Well, let me deal with, first of all, the why now. And I think the first part of that is there has been such a transformation of the work from home landscape. I mean, COVID-19 has, as we all know, completely transformed the place. Work from home it's clear to everyone, it's here to stay, and it's here to stay at a very significant threshold. And I think what's interesting is actually the numbers that people are anticipating are going to be at home are actually on the rise. So I think if you'd asked me 3 or 4 months ago, I would have said people's average perception was around the sort of 40%. But actually what I'm hearing now from those who've got really large numbers of agents who naturally are surveying their population is that is actually climbing up to about 50-60%. Of where their agents, and this is companies who've got over 100,000 employees to do the survey with. So it's a dramatic impact on the whole way in which we're working. And in fact, you can see companies start to shift the way they're even structured. So I could see in one of the Gartner reports recently, there's a new title in people's organizations called Head of Remote Working, which would have even existed a year and a half ago. So that's the kind of first reason why now. And the second, I think, is the whole scale of the security issues. And, the three of us touched on this last time we were talking together. Several thousand ransomware attacks among sort of government, healthcare, schools, organizations in the US. So it's almost as though this whole sort of security thing has become normalized to the point where it's almost happening out there, and we don't see it happening. So that's the kind of why now. I think what's the focus, Mark, that I saw the two of us really try and tackle? It was really all around those who are in the midst of operationalizing their work at home strategy. I think, despite the public positioning, the reality is that a lot of people are still in the midst of kind of going, how am I really going to get this whole thing to work technologically and from a process point of view? And they're thinking through multiple aspects of that, both technology, process, and so on. And even the largest organizations, have got a primary focus on thinking through how are they going to make it work at home. So I think what we were trying to do was give people who are doing that process and thinking about it some tips, some tools, and some experiences from the largest BPOs in the world, who are probably those companies who were already at the head in terms of thinking about how to approach things.
Okay, that's a great introduction. And now, Shelli, you're based in Las Vegas and you wrote the foreword for the book. And, one of the things I remember you mentioning was that you've actually been doing work from home, managing your entire company for 25 years. Obviously, you don't look, as if you've been running a company for 25 years. But so it's not just about the pandemic for you. You've been doing this since you founded the company. I mean, is there a very different approach that you have to take when you're managing a distributed team and not actually just running a team out of one office?
Yeah, it is quite different. And I had a great time writing the foreword and collaborating with you, Jen. So I do think that BPOs and BPO marketers need to take a pause and look at what happened last year, because it is a different approach, especially when it comes to working from home and you're a marketer or you are a professional services person. And what I found over the last 25 years is a couple of things have to happen. One is you have to pick well. Those who can work from a remote environment and be judged by their deliverables or their output, not necessarily going from meeting to meeting to meeting and nothing is produced. So that's number one. But also number two is accountability and extreme ownership of your work, and having the ability to maybe never even seeing or meeting your team members like we do. We work with clients in 69 countries. And oftentimes we never meet these folks in person, but rather we're in the digital realm. And so extreme accountability, having an opportunity to lean into processes and governance that allow those teams to do their very best work, I think are going to be those things moving forward in a remote environment. I do think that BPO marketing, and that's where our sweet spot is, where we manage our teams who are remote and worldwide. But we also manage the BPO marketing teams as an outsourced team member, helping to guide and coach and mentor those teams in different countries. You have to have those governances in place. But as Andrew mentioned, those processes that keep them safe, especially security, and those things that can be in the cloud, like collaborative software tools and Zoom meetings, for instance, really do help to keep those teams connected. But I do think that BPO marketing is going to be forever changed. And I know, Mark, you probably have seen this with your clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's interesting, that what you just mentioned there about this focus on deliverables, output is more important than time spent at the desk. And so that's a very different approach. And I think that some of my clients are certainly talking about that now as well. And that kind of translates as the whole move towards gig CX as well.
That's right. Well, and also say, Mark, that I think it was Fifth Talent had a survey just out recently to say that, look, we have fatigue. Don't keep bringing us on meeting after meeting after meeting. We're not getting anything done. And it really translates into agents and supervisors having fatigue too in BPO. And how do you keep them motivated? How do you keep them productive? And I think what we'll find is we'll need to make sure that those processes and those people skills are honed in for that remote worker.
Yeah. Andrew, let's look at the threat from work from home, or the potential threat, because you mentioned that in your introduction. But do you think that some companies that were forced to adopt this because of the pandemic are maybe still in a state of flux and haven't really reviewed their security, or are even hoping to kind of go back to how things were?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of the sort of real threat, some of that is the way in which people are looking at the technology. So, have they really locked things down? And I think what a lot of people have done have tended to be looking at it from the contact center point of view. So when you've got everybody in a contact center, that was what made everybody happy. You could lock everybody down and make sure, yep, it's all good to go. And that has led, I think, rather to a sort of network-centric view of the world. So provided I've got all my bits and pieces sorted out centrally, I'm all good to go. But actually, what work from home has done is very much widened the attack vector. So now you've got thousands of endpoints and you're not really quite clear about them. But if you only think network centrally, the danger is that some of your information which is being processed out there on the edge is going to be vulnerable to attack, as well as some things coming in. So that's the challenge. And as Shelli has just pointed out, how you engage with people, because people are a really important part of the whole process. I think, though, to answer your question, when people are doing the reviews, I think it's very hard in these kind of cases to speak in generalities, because really it varies so much from company to company. I think most people have done some kind of review of how does it work in terms of working from home. Not everybody is liking what they see when they do those reviews. And indeed, some of what's coming out of that is encourage people to come and engage with us and seek to plug some of those gaps. The more sophisticated, large technology companies have really made massive wholesale decisions to move everything work from home, and they are doing an end-to-end review of their entire business process, working out which ones can actually be put work at home and trying to restrict those that can't to the absolute minimum, and then stress testing the entire aspect of it so that it works well from a work at home point of view, from an agent point of view, from a customer point of view. But you've got to think of lots of aspects when you're really doing it. So I think people do need to do very careful and very thorough reviews. Some have, some haven't, and it varies considerably from company to company.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And Shelli, you mentioned that you work with many different BPO companies, helping them to raise their profile. Have you seen a uniform response across that part of the industry then? I mean, are all the BPOs reacting to this challenge in the same way, or are you seeing some very different approaches from different clients?
Initially in 2020, it seemed like most BPOs were responding in the same way, bringing everybody home, locking everything down, taking computers and making them isolated inside their homes.
Yep.
And as I looked at that response, it felt like the brick and mortar agent taking him home was almost like having Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg in the same kitchen. You're thinking, this is going to be a complete train wreck. But what we found was that they made a perfect match because of the pre-planning that went into play with making sure that the agents had, as Andrew said, the security behind them, but also the processes in place. And then moving forward, making sure that they had supervisorial check-ins by technology. But I will have to say, I did notice something, and Mark, you probably noticed this as well in 2020. During the pandemic, while the agents were at home, the BPO leadership were looking at what does this mean from business perspective? And they started to, and you and I have written about this, started to look at, do we need to do things differently from a positioning standpoint? Is it more digital? Do we need to be more digital? How do we capture the FANG companies? How do we become more of a CX digital transformation company within the walls of the BPO? And what I found was that this is the moment where, by and large, almost every BPO, sizable BPO, changed up their positioning, reworked their value proposition for 2021 to go after these digital companies. But what I find as a misstep, just as an aha moment, is this. If you're continuing to do digital marketing like you had pre-pandemic, you're not going to win in this race for the FANG companies. What's going to happen is we need to go to the to the Gen Z population, which are those folks who were born 1997 to 2012, I believe it is. And the CMO of MTV said that they swiped before they wiped. So they know of digital transformation. They understand all of this digital stuff, but that's not how to engage them. So if you're truly going to look at these FANG companies and try to get more of them from a BPO marketing perspective, you have to do things differently. And what you do differently is this. You go after the Gen Zs. And how do you do that? Well, you have to have the marketing structure in place, like I mentioned before, that governance of an executive leader, like a CMO in place. And then you have that operational governance where all the analytics, all the operations are feeding into that. And then you have the doers. The doer layer is where the BPOs are sitting now. I profess that BPOs are going to acknowledge that they have to have that operational layer in place, and then they have to have that executive layer in place. And some of the BPOs now are doing this. I think IBEX, Transcom, and Concentrix are doing it now, where they put these CMOs in place. I think you'll see that moving forward as an end result of why the pandemic was so interesting and how the BPOs are now going to respond differently in the marketing space where we play.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you mentioned a few of the big brands there as well. And Andrew, I mean, some of those companies are probably clients of Thinscale already.
Yep.
But, you know, and we've talked quite a bit about BPO here and the contact centers, because obviously they were dramatically affected by the fact they had so many people in offices. But are you seeing this across the board, Andrew? I mean, is it clients of yours from many different types of company are having the same issues, and this is not just a BPO problem?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm still stuck with Shelli's phrase, swipe before you wipe. That's definitely going to stay with me, Shelli. I think that's a brilliant articulation. I can just see my younger son in the car seat once upon a time, you know, with the iPhone. It's a brilliant articulation of it. But yeah, I think in terms of the distinction between BPOs and other kinds of companies, I think the BPOs were very similarly affected to everybody. Everybody had to just get everybody home rapidly. I think where the BPOs actually had an edge were there were a number of them who had, you guys have been sort of part of this work from home movement for a long period of time. So you're familiar with those BPOs that were kind of slightly ahead of the game. They had work from home programs. They'd thought through the technology and the execution of it. In many cases, they were companies we were working with, and were using our technology to facilitate it. And I think those that had that kind of approach, had the program in place, and had our technology, executed remarkably well, because they were able to put tens of thousands of agents work at home in a few weeks and do it seamlessly. Whereas kind of in the way that Shelli was articulating the front of what she was just saying, many of the others were sort of queuing up in, you know, there's Barrow Street is where Google, for example, in Dublin have their thing. And the taxis in Barrow Street was the enduring image in Ireland of that first week of the pandemic, and people cluttering monitors and keyboards and mice into cabs to get them home. And I think for many companies, that was just the reality of the pandemic. But those who did a really good job of it grew in their knowledge and understanding. And I think what is happening now actually is some of those people have got deeper and deeper into understanding the whole work from home business, and particularly secure BYOD. And they're actually putting their entire system and driving it in that direction, because there are three compelling reasons. You've got massive economic benefit if people would go BYOD. You've got huge ecological benefit, because you're not crunching devices backwards and forwards and logistically shipping them and picking them up and all the rest of it. And third, if you're equipping employees with a device, you're actually doing something more than just giving them a job. You're actually giving them a piece of technology which will help them beyond the duration potentially of the job. That's a lot of compelling reasons. People are seeing that, and they're experiencing cost and scale. And so I think actually we happen to be in a very fortunate place, and secure BYOD will be the way of the future for BPOs. Now, finally, to answer your question, I feel like a politician who's dodged it long enough. I think for other organizations, what I'm coming across is those who've experienced vulnerabilities are now coming to us and going, help, I got stuck, I got hurt, I got burned. Can you help me? I need to do something rapidly. So I've got few of those now are starting to roll in from beyond the BPO industry. And because the BPO industry serves all other industries, the word is gradually filtering out. And traditionally, I think up until now, captives tend to have thought, well, BPO, we know better than they do. But actually, when it comes to work from home, and particularly in terms of executing work from home and secure BYOD, the BPOs are actually ahead of captives.
Yeah, and that's. I think that's a story that we're seeing play out over and over again now. Although, I think captives are still about 75% of the contact center market. So, it's a very interesting dynamic now.
And Mark, what the captives have learned from the pandemic is this: the CX journey is an opportunity for care and social and marketing to triangulate. And at every point within the journey, there's a marketing opportunity. So the BPOs and their marketers need to better understand that at every point, you're probably going to have a marketer involved in the CX journey. And what does that mean to the BPOs? It means that now your marketing team is not just a cost center, but they could potentially be a revenue generator or profit center for the BPO to either rent them out or have them alongside your CX advisory board or advisory services to better serve the customer. Because at the end of the day, it's the customer where we're trying to influence behavior.
I mean, Andrew, closing this discussion a little bit now, what can executives do? I mean, if someone picks up this book and thinks, well, you know what, we did a quick review last year, but we kind of expected this to be over by now. What's the sort of next steps for them to take if they're now coming around to the realization that this might be permanent?
I think, Mark, what I would do if I was in their place is do what I was beginning to refer to that some of the largest technology companies around the globe are doing. And that is conducting this thorough audit of their own work from home processes. I was, for a company of that scale, when they were asked, what are your top 3 priorities, that this was one of them. I thought that was super interesting. And what that really means is, going into every single aspect of how you do things. So, for example, if you're taking credit cards from customers because you want to process a payment and you've already dealt with that customer, you don't need to give the agent all 16 digits of the card. You can just give him 4 and she can confirm that with the customer, and then boom, you can use what the system already knows. When it comes, for example, to approval processes, you want to make sure if the agent's at home, you want to make sure that agent won't know what the authorization or approval place that it's going to. So you want to automate the allocation of that so that there can't be any collusion and you can't create fraud within that kind of system. In other words, it's thinking through my whole process from technology, security, and all the kind of people aspects that Shelli touched on earlier in the process, so that there's not Zoom fatigue, so that you're engaging well with employees, so that you're communicating. So it's security, it's technology, it's execution. So it's doing the whole review to make sure that the way in which you're operating really works well for work at home.
Just to close out the podcast then, could you both just make a quick comment about either the process of creating the book or why someone should pick it up? Let's kick off with Shelli.
Well, I think the soundbite here is that it's an easy read. It has no security jargon, and it's something that all of us should probably take a look at, because regardless of where we go, we're gonna work from home now and again. So I think it's an easy read, and minus the security jargon.
So, Mark, I think from my perspective, it's kind of a little bit how we started at the top. It's so many people are right in the middle of thinking this through. You and I and Shelli, we've all had the benefit of working closely with some of the world's biggest BPOs who've really had to think this through very carefully. And what I hope has come out of this cooperation is a sense of real clear, practical, simple examples coming from that best practice world that people can apply in a simple and easy way when they're thinking through their own particular circumstances and situations. And I hope that's what would come across from reading the book.
Right, Shelli and Andrew, thank you very much. Great to have you on the CX Files. Thanks for downloading the CX Files podcast. If you have a moment, please give us a star rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, because this really helps other people to find the podcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, or ideas, people or topics, then please just find myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan on LinkedIn and send a suggestion.